everyone, we are back with another Nancy Drew no spoiler reviews, and I had thrown out in my last video I wanted to know if you guys wanted me to keep going on with the no spoiler format or if you wanted me to get more in depth with the stories themselves, maybe have a few spoiler points but kind of just really dig deep into it. And most of the responses that I got did want me to keep it as a no spoiler format, which I will be honoring. I totally understand that a lot of people do not want spoilers, so we are going to be keeping it that way, and we're going to keep it a little more surface level on the stories themselves, but I will still give you a few little plot points that I thought were interesting or funny or silly or whatever it may be. But I will not be ruining any of these stories, so if you would like to read any of these yourself, think of this as just a little taste of what you can expect from the stories. So in this video we are going to be covering the next 5 books, which is going to be books number 41 through 45. And as always, you guys know we do an orphan counter in this series, so this is what the latest orphan counter was, where we left off from the last video, and I will be letting you know if we come across any more orphans or not. Alright, so starting off with the first book, we have book number 41. This one is called The Clue of the Whistling Bagpipes, and this one was originally published in 1964. So as always, I will begin by reading the synopsis. Warnings not to go to Scotland can't stop Nancy Drew from setting out on a thrill-packed mystery adventure. Undaunted by the vicious threats, the attractive young detective, with her father and 2 close friends, goes to visit her great-grandmother at an imposing estate in the Scottish Highlands and to solve the mystery of a missing family heirloom. And there, another mystery to be solved: the fate of the flocks of the stolen sheep. Baffling clues challenge Nancy's powers of deduction, a note written in the ancient Gaelic language, a deserted houseboat on Loch Lomond, a sinister red-bearded stranger in Edinburgh, and eerie whistling noises in the Highlands. Startling discoveries in an old castle and in the ruins of prehistoric fortress, on a rugged mountain slope and in a secluded glen, lead Nancy closer to finding the solutions to both mysteries. Wearing a time-honored tartan, Nancy climbs the mountain of Ben Nevis in the dark of night and plays a tune of historic heroism on the bagpipes, all part of her daring plan to trap the sheep thieves and recover the valuable family heirloom. So we do not have any orphans in the story, and as far as the bingo goes, I did get a bingo on this card, and I actually had a good one. I got 4 bingos on here. I got 4 5 across bingos, and that was pretty awesome. Alright, so as always, I have my notes on this story. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will be pointing out a few little things I either thought were funny or just, little points of interest. If I do have any spoilers, I will definitely have timestamps where you can skip that if you do not want to hear it, but like I said, I will keep these pretty light. Okay, so I always like to take notes whenever I start the books, and this was my starting note that I wrote down while I was reading. And I said, okay, haven't started yet, but I have some high hopes for this mystery. International, going to Scotland. I hope most of, if not all of the book takes place in Scotland. Okay, here we go. So if you guys are not familiar, I really like the international mysteries. I just think they're so fun, and I like when it's set in a real place. It doesn't necessarily have to be an international mystery, but anytime it's like in a real place where I can look it up and research it and learn the layouts and the geographies and stuff, I just find it so much more of a true world building experience for me as I'm reading. Don't get me wrong though, I really do like the River Heights mysteries and the surrounding fictitious, hometown mysteries, as I like to call them. I always think those are really interesting too, but it just kind of gives me a little bit more of like a blank slate as far as how to imagine everything, whereas an actual real location just kind of gives me a little bit more life to the story. So I was really excited that we were going to Scotland for this mystery, especially since I am not very familiar with Scotland at all, like as far as geography wise as the country itself. I just really didn't have much of a clue, so that was one thing that was really fun for me, was to look up all the locations that they were going to and kind of just like piecing together along the mystery of geographically where they were at. So I always just find that so much fun. Which brings me to my next point. One thing that I really thought was fun about this mystery is that we actually do get a little bit more of like a sneak peek into Nancy's mom's side of the family. Up until now into the series, we really don't know that much about her. We truly don't even know her name as far as like canon goes, but I'm always just intrigued to see what we're going to learn about Nancy. So in this mystery, Nancy is going to her great grandmother's estate in Scotland. So we know that Nancy is of Scottish heritage, which makes sense with her being a redhead. And another thing I always kind of like to track just for my own kind of like interest is like what time of year these mysteries are supposed to be taking place in. So with this one, we actually know that the story takes place sometime before June 10th, which is specifically noted in the dialogue of the story when Nancy is talking to Ned, who just happens to be returning from South America, which is funny because he has been to South America before in one of the mysteries where he's just kind of mentioned in passing of being in South America, which is funny because he was also in Hong Kong in the mystery of the fire dragon. So now we know he's like been to Hong Kong, he's been to like South America at least twice in connection with his studies, which makes me wonder like what's Ned got going on. So we do have a little bit of foreshadowing here, I think, in two different ways, which I will bring back up later. So with all that being said, that puts us about middle of May as far as the story goes time-wise. So another little funny note, we finally get another mention of Nancy's dog Togo. We have not actually had another mention of him in any of the stories since number 36, which was the mystery of the Golden Pavilion. So if we're talking like in real life publishing time, that was 5 years prior that Togo was last mentioned, which makes him like 35 years in dog years that Nancy hasn't mentioned Togo. It's kind of funny how he seems to kind of just be there when he's useful and then we forget all about him when he's not. We also get a few more little mentions of Nancy and Ned kissing, so that's definitely becoming a little bit more common now, whereas in the beginning of the books, you know, it was always very like they were holding hands, you know, never kissing, never anything like that, but we have been getting several mentions of kisses within the last couple books here and there, so it's definitely becoming a little bit more common, which I think is very cute. And as always, most stories Nancy does have, like, I call them like her Nancy superpowers, where she's just like, it's like a new Nancy skill that helps her solve the mystery. And if it was not obvious, again, this is not a spoiler because it's on the damn cover, Nancy does learn to play the bagpipes, which I think is crazily go-getter of her because that cannot be an easy instrument to just pick up and learn. So definitely going to be seeing a lot of Nancy and how she uses that skill to solve the mystery. Another little interesting tidbit we have, this is actually the second mystery that kind of uses handwriting analysis as a plot point in the story. The first time we had that was again in the Fire Dragon mystery, where the handwriting kind of was scrutinized to try to make a certain, I guess, deduction, where we do see this again in the story by Ned. But I have to say that the conclusions he jumped to were insanely specific and honestly a little bit disbelieving if you're gonna ask me, at just how he seems to very accurately peg a certain individual, I will say. This was another one of those books where it kind of took me a little bit longer to get through, so I didn't take as many notes on this as I probably should have. So a lot of the travel when we get to Scotland and all of the, you know, here and there plot points and things like that that Nancy goes through, I didn't really line out a whole lot. But in this mystery, we do again have more of like an A plot, B plot type of structure. And another thing that happens in the story that I think we kind of have seen a couple times before and we're starting to see within this next kind of group is the kind of plot device where the villains are kind of coming after Nancy before she's even aware of a mystery or what's kind of going on. We definitely saw that in this case where it's just like right off the bat, we've already got villains coming, but she has no clue what is even going on, which I think is a little bit of a silly kind of way to introduce the story. A lot of the books, they do like to kind of start off with like a bam of action right in the beginning. But I do think it's kind of funny that, you know, she's got bad guys coming after her and she has no clue why yet. So we do see that a few more times throughout this group of books. So in the end, I ranked this one 3 stars. I thought it was an okay mystery. And like I said, if I had read it a bit faster, I think I would have kept my interest more. But it was really fun kind of like seeing and hearing all the descriptions of Scotland and all the places they were going. And like I said, I did kind of have to like keep track of where they were going to geographically kind of keep it straight in my mind. But I thought it was a very interesting one. Of course, I always love the international mysteries, so this one was a really fun one. All right, so moving on to the next book, this is number 42. This is The Phantom of Pine Hill. This one was published in 1965, and the summary for this one reads, when Nancy Drew, together with her two close friends, arrive for the Emerson University June Week celebration and learn there has been a mix-up in their hotel reservations, the confusion leads to a baffling mystery. Uncle John Rorick, a descendant of early settlers of the town of Emerson, invites the three girls to be his guests at his historic mansion on Pine Hill. Shortly after their arrival, he tells them about the phantom who haunts the mansion's library. Uncle John also relates the weird family saga of a lost French wedding gown and valuable gifts which went to the bottom of a nearby cove in the sinking of the Lucy Belle 100 years before. Could there possibly be some connection between the phantom and the old ship disaster, Nancy wonders? In between enjoying the university's June week boat races, river pageant, and fraternity dances, Nancy and her friends work diligently to solve the mystery of Pine Hill and to find the long-lost wedding treasures. The exciting climax will be as much of a thrill as for the reader as it was for the famous teenage detective herself. Alright guys, we actually do not have any orphans in this story, and as far as my bingo card goes, I did get 1 5 across bingo. Alright, so starting off my notes on this one, I have Nancy's motel reservations fall through, so Ned tells the girls they should go stay at a lonely old man's house on Pine Hill. Yikes. Yeah, that's not creepy at all. They also say apparently he was one of the uncles of one of the professors at Emerson University, so he's supposed to be a cool guy. So one thing I have always wanted to know about Ned is what fraternity he is in, because that has been mentioned several times throughout the series up until this point, and we finally actually get to know what fraternity Ned, Bert, and Dave are in at Emerson University, and I was so excited because it's really cool. So the fraternity that the boys are a part of is Omega Chi Epsilon, and I actually looked this up because I was interested. Omega Chi Epsilon was established in 1931, and it is a chemical engineering frat founded in Illinois, which I thought was so interesting because Illinois is kind of generally the agreed upon area of where like River Heights is supposed to be, I guess, situated. There is a little bit debate back and forth on that, so that's not like an set in stone type of thing, but it's generally Midwest is where River Heights is supposed to be, and it does seem to kind of vary. Some places said it was more like Ohio, it was more Indiana, some places said later in the series they start to think maybe it's more of like in the New Jersey area, but I've always kind of wondered like where Emerson was in comparison to River Heights and all of that, so I thought it was really interesting that he is in a frat that was started in Illinois, but we will talk more about this later because this does kind of come back around. So I said, is Ned a chemical engineering major? And I said, if so, then why would he go to Hong Kong and learn Cantonese and then also go to South America several times? Which I guess there could be a reason for it, but I thought maybe it was like, before I thought at one point it was mentioned that he wanted to either be like an FBI agent or that he was in some type of like international business. I don't know if I made that up in my mind, but I feel like that was mentioned somewhere or hinted at somewhere. So kind of a little funny quirk about the old man, Uncle John Rorick. So he's telling the girls all about the family mystery of the ancestors that had wedding gifts coming over on the ship Lucy Belle, and they go to the library in his house, and he's kind of eccentric if you ask me, because he tends to hide money in a very specific way, which just kind of didn't make sense to me because it's later mentioned that he has a safe. I was just kind of questioning like, why would you hide your money in the way that you're hiding it when you could be hiding it in the safe? But he's hiding a lot of money. So in the story, it's supposed to be like over $1,000. But if you were to calculate that with inflation, that means he's hiding like $9,700. Kind of interesting if you ask me. We also, of course, have the never-ending trope of Bess and George, with George just fat shaming Bess to all hell. It's honestly not funny, and it really aggravates me every single time I read it in the story, and I just always take notes because it gets me that mad. So this time Bess says, "I'm starved," and George says, "That seems to be a perpetual complaint of yours. What happened to that diet you were going to follow?" And Bess responds, "You know I've lost 7 pounds." And then George says, "Which you'll put right back on if you don't stop stuffing your face." Isn't that just so rude. Like, first of all, good for you, Bess, for losing 7 pounds. That is like an amazing accomplishment, and it shouldn't be belittled by someone like George. I don't know why Bess is always like written as like the whiny, scaredy cat, can never lose weight and just likes to eat, but then George gets a pass because she's a tomboy and she's tough and she's, you know, mean to Bess all the time. I don't know why some people like George, because she is so unlikable in my opinion, and I have never felt more seen by Bess, because I will say this a million times, Bess and I are one and the same. Another little funny type of thing I noticed, and this was actually not something I noticed, but I like to go through after I finish the books, and I like to go and read the Goodreads reviews. So this was actually pointed out by another Goodreads reviewer, and her name was Melody, so I wanted to give her a shout out for that. So she actually caught that there's a character in this story and his name is Chuck Wilson, and that is actually a character name that was used in the ski jump mystery. There was a character named Chuck Wilson and they just used the same exact name, and I was kind of surprised that they would reuse that name, especially since I think Ski Jump Mystery was number 26 and we're on what, number 42? I guess if you think of like in publishing years, you know, that was 10, 12 years ago, maybe a little more. But either way, you think that they wouldn't have like completely just reused another character's name like that. Like, not even just it was a first name that they repeated, but it was like the full name they reused. And it's apparently not supposed to be the same person. So good catch to you, Melody. So I think one thing you absolutely cannot deny in this story, I mean, if we look at the cover alone, let me just say, this is not a Native American person that is clearly dressed up as a Native American chief. I will let that stay there because there is a lot of red face in this story and it was just very not good to read. And every time I read it, I was just like, oh, don't do that. So definitely be aware there are some racial insensitivities in the story, and not even just in like dressing up, but there are some questionable things later in the story as far as certain locations that are being dug up, and especially what is found at said place when it is dug up. So to keep the spoiler free, we'll leave it there. So with the story, again, we have another A plot, B plot. The first plot being, of course, who is breaking into the library mansion, and then the B plot is all about the ancestral wedding gifts. I really think that they should have gone with the B plot as the main plot because there's so much history built around it. I feel like they could have done a really cool, interesting story where that became more of the focal point of the story, because I really thought that even though I did find the true A plot kind of interesting, I think that the B plot would have been so much more fun and historical and really interesting that they could have built an entire story around that premise alone. And I kind of feel like it didn't get done justice in this story, in my opinion. Another little nitpicky point that I have, that is one thing that really drives me insane whenever they do this, is at the very end of the story, they kind of throw in a few extra bad guys that really I felt was unnecessary, and it felt like they just kind of put them in there to fill out the bad guy roster, you know? Which a pet peeve of mine is when they have way too many villains. And this one I just felt like they just threw a couple of them in there just to like make it feel like there were more villains than there really were. And I felt like they could have written the story better to not even need to do that. So I just felt like that was a weird last minute kind of addition that wasn't quite necessary. All right, so I rank this one 4 stars. Aside from the racial insensitivities that is very hard to overlook, I did really think this was a really fun, interesting story, and it kind of reminded me of the book, I think it was number 16, and I think it was called The Clue of the Tapping Heels. That one had another case where you had a villain that was getting in somehow, but you didn't really know how, and I find that this one was kind of along the lines of that, but this one was a lot more interesting in my opinion. And of course, it's always fun. You have a kooky old man who's got a lot of money, more than he knows what to do with apparently, so it's always a good time. And like I was hinting at from the story from this one, The Clue of the Whistling Bagpipes, Ned was talking about Nancy's got to hurry up and solve her mystery in Scotland to be back in time for the Emerson celebrations, which we end up getting to see through this book. So I like that there was just that teeny tiny through line from book to book, and I wish they would do that so much more. Like, even if it's just a teeny tiny little detail like that that carries on from one book to another, or, you know, carries on from the previous book to the succeeding book. I love when they do that. So that was a little detail that I just thought was really, really interesting, and I like how it fell in line as far as the timeline goes. All right, guys, next up we have number 43. This one is The Mystery of the 99 Steps. This one was published in 1966, and the story reads, Nancy Drew's search for a flight of 99 steps to solve the mystery of a friend's weird dream takes her to France. But before she leaves the United States, an unknown person calling himself Monsieur Neuf warns the young sleuth not to pursue her mission. With her friends Bess and George, Nancy arrives in Paris to join her father, who is working on another case, to find out what or who is frightening wealthy financier Monsieur Leblanc into selling large amounts of securities. Startling discoveries convince the young detective that Mr. Drew's case and her own mystery are linked by the 99 steps, and that a mysterious Arab has a strong hold over Leblanc. Is it blackmail, she wonders? Nancy's quest for further clues leads to the romantic chateau country in the Loire Valley, where a web of danger closes in tightly around the three girls. How Nancy unearths the exciting mystery of the 99 steps will hold the reader spellbound with suspense. So yet again, we do not have any orphans in this story. I know, I feel like we're going through an orphan dry spell, which is kind of unheard of in Nancy Drew, in my opinion. And as far as the bingo goes, unfortunately, I did not bingo on this card, but I got so close in several ways. All right, so as far as my notes here, my first note was, saw the first illustration and read the synopsis and literally said, oof, the second an Arab character is mentioned. I will be shocked if he is not the villain. Here we go. Nancy Drew seems to never quite have the right sensitivities when it comes to any ethnicity other than white people, so just be aware. There's definitely a bit of racial language that, I don't know, just feels a little off. It's not the worst, but it definitely just feels like a little off. So another thing that I did in this book that I haven't done previously was I actually kind of kept track chronologically of like how many days this mystery was supposed to take place, because that's one thing that I kind of wish I would do more often, is like kind of keep it all straight. Like, how many days does Nancy actually solve these mysteries in? Sometimes it seems like it's pretty quick, and sometimes it seems like it takes her a little bit longer. So I actually tracked, and what I ended up counting was it took Nancy 9 days to solve this mystery, which I think is kind of funny because there is a little bit of symbology when it comes to the number 9 and 99 in this story. So I wonder if that was intentional or not, but I thought that was a little funny detail. And I do have to say, I think the premise of this mystery is so extremely thin, because Nancy's neighbor is having bad dreams about falling down a flight of steps and someone whispering, you know, beware of the 99 steps to her or something like that. And Nancy's like, enough said, I'm going to France. And she just like picks up the mystery and goes with it. And I think that was such a very interesting choice and so paper thin. I don't know how anyone would even begin to solve the mystery of that case. So I thought that was interesting, but hey, Nancy, money is no issue, and she's like, I'm gonna go to France, bye. Another thing to be aware of is that not only Nancy, but Bess and George are all fluent in French, which definitely comes in very handy in this mystery. It's definitely mentioned that they're always speaking in French, you know, and not just, you know, everyone happens to speak English to her. There was a funny plot point that made me laugh, just because, again, it's like we've been through this before. So there's one point where the girls hear a helicopter above Nancy's house, and it said the girls listened tensely, knowing it was against River Heights ordinance for any aircraft to fly so low over the residential area. And my note said, Nancy, you literally flew a helicopter and flew close enough to your house to see a burglar breaking into your house in book number 36, The Golden Pavilion. Remember when she was flying back from the dog show that that Togo won first place in? And I said, yep, that really happened. So it's okay if Nancy flies over, but God forbid someone else break air ordinance laws. So the one thing that I really loved about this story, and I think that honestly, did bias my opinion on how I ranked the book was that I have been to a lot of these locations that were mentioned in the book. So Nancy does end up going to, she goes to the Louvre, she goes to Notre Dame. I have been to those places as well. There's several other places she ends up going to that I had been to before, to Versailles. And so for me, it just had a little bit more of like a personal connection for me for this book, because even though there were several places that she went that I had not been to, all the places she had been to, all the memories were just like rushing back into my mind, and I could like vividly picture all of these places. So this one was just a really fun personal book for me to read, and I think it totally biased my opinion a little bit on the story, but it was definitely a really good read. So I did end up ranking this one 5 stars. Yes, I'm very biased. If I was going to give this like a true, how would I rank it based on the story itself, I think I would give it maybe like a 3.5 if I was going to do like a half ranking. But honestly, this one, it was just a really fun book for me to read with having all those memories coming back. So yes, I definitely think that my opinion is biased, but that's okay with me. All right, moving on to the next book, we have number 44, The Clue in the Crossword Cipher. This one was published in 1967. So this one reads, told against the fascinating background of South America, this Nancy Drew mystery adventure makes exciting reading. Lovely young Carla Ponce, who lives in Peru, invites Nancy and her best friends Bess and George to visit her and solve her monkey mystery, which promises to lead to a fabulous treasure. The clue is carved on an intriguing wooden plaque that is so old most of the crossword cipher is obliterated. When a notorious gang headed by El Gato, the cat, steals the priceless relic, Nancy's hopes of solving the mystery are almost shattered. But the daring young detective's ability to think fast and act quickly results in the recovery of the plaque. Nancy's determined efforts to decode the crossword cipher take her to the magnificent, awe-inspiring Incan ruins at Cusco and Machu Picchu. Through clever deductions, perseverance, and dangerous adventures, Nancy and her friends help to capture a ring of vicious smugglers and go on to make an astounding archaeological discovery. So once again, we have no orphans in this story, and as far as my bingo card goes, I did not bingo on this one, but again, I got very close in a couple ways, but no bingo this time. So going back to, like I said in the first book, how I said there were a few foreshadowing moments, we had a mention of Ned just coming back from South America, and I wondered if that was kind of a little hint at what was coming down the line as far as the next few mysteries. So I wonder if that was a little hint to this one. So in the story, I thought it was very interesting because this is one of the cases that, you know, Nancy doesn't really, I don't say she doesn't do much because that's totally not the truth, but what I mean is that she has the single most item that she needs to solve the mystery from day one. You know, it's not like she has to go find this plaque or uncover it in some way. Like, she literally has everything she needs to solve the mystery from page 1. And it seems like the story was very heavy on the fact that Nancy just had to go to the end of the world to just find the right people and ask the right questions, which definitely seemed to be what was carrying a lot of the mystery in this story. And if you have not caught on, yes, this is the 3rd international mystery in this block of books, which I thought was very interesting because I feel like they typically tend to kind of space them out a little bit more, which I think for my own personal reading, it would have been better had they not just done Scotland. Then we had like what I call a hometown mystery with Pine Hill. You know, it's not River Heights, but it's not a real place. So we've got Scotland, Pine Hill, then we've got France, now we've got Peru. And not only does Nancy go to Peru, but she also goes to Argentina and back to Peru. So she's all over the place as far as South America goes in this mystery. And at one point I actually tried to geographically look up all these places because I realized I am very, very unfamiliar with the geography of South America. And so at one point Nancy, she gets to Lima, Peru, and then they end up going to Argentina as part of the mystery. And I looked up and I was like, wow, how long would it take to do that? And so I looked by car. It would have been a 54-hour car ride. 54 hours. I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it would take that long to get from Peru to this specific place in Argentina. That blew my mind. However, in Nancy Drew land, there is no end of money, wealth, and chartered jets at the drop of a hat, so luckily Nancy didn't have to worry about that. And another thing, I feel like Nancy Drew stories, obviously they're written for kids, so they try to like put a lot of these really easy to read clues right into the story, but 99% of the time in a Nancy Drew story, if a character is described as shifty, having shifty eyes, they're gonna be a villain. And that just is what it is. Okay, another thing, this is a little bit more, I don't know, I think it's a little out there kind of deduction for me to make, but there is one thing that I've heard a lot of Nancy Drew readers say before, that they always kind of suspected that George is queer. And to be honest, aside from her being a tomboy and, you know, having, you know, the name George and like liking her hair short and stuff, nothing really led me to believe that so far. So I'm not sure how much of that is either wishful thinking or if there's more things coming that I just don't know about yet. But there was one little line in the story that made me think, could that have been like a little Easter egg? So there's one point where Nancy, Bess, and George are in a museum, and there's just this, you know, bickering couple that end up causing a little bit of trouble, we'll say. And so after the fact, Bess makes a comment and she said, "If I had a husband like that," and George responds with, "or a wife like that." And I always kind of wondered, I was like, I wonder if that was like a little Easter egg or not, because Bess is obviously thinking about the man, but then George was thinking about the woman. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but we will definitely see as the series progresses if there's any more like little clues like that, because for some reason some people are just convinced that George is a lesbian, which I think is fine, but I don't know. I don't know if I've seen the evidence yet. And again, it is not a Nancy Drew book if Bess is not getting absolutely fat shamed to hell. So this story, it was really rough in the story, and I feel like, you know, whenever I go back and read the Goodreads, I have never seen as many people comment on the fat shaming aspect as I have when I was reading the reviews for this book. So here is just one of the ever so lovely mentions, and there are several. And some of these are just absolutely like brutal, whereas sometimes she's like poking fun and sometimes she's just straight up mean. This is one of those cases. So Bess says, "There's been so much excitement since we left home, I feel as if I will burst." And George says, "Well, my dear fat cousin, that might be one way to lose some weight." Like, she wasn't even talking about food at all. Like, literally not talking about food at all. She was just talking about like how excited she was to be there, and George had to take it there. George is such a bitch sometimes, you guys. Honestly, I don't know why people like her. I literally wrote in my notes, I am ready to throw some fucking hands with George. Oh, another moment of George just being absolutely horrible to Bess. She reaches out to grab a third slice of bread and George slaps her hand and says, "No, you don't." Like, is that supposed to be cute? I don't know. That's just rude. Yet again, we have Bess. She eats a lot of dinner and George says, "If you have a tummy ache tonight, enjoy it by yourself." I'm so done with her. I'm so done with her. And then not only does Bess get fat shamed to all hell from George, but she also gets it from other characters as well. And this point was just so dumb in the story. I don't know why they even bothered to include it other than just to make Bess look bad. So at one point, Bess like gets on an alpaca and she wants someone to take her picture, and the alpaca won't move. So there's a character that tells her that she weighs too much and says, "Miss Marvin, you must weigh more than 100 pounds. That's the limit of a burden an alpaca will carry. He cannot be coaxed. You may as well get off." Like, what was the point of even that? Like, it literally does not advance the story in any way. It just makes Bess look stupid for the sake of looking stupid. And obviously, Nancy and George are also gonna weigh more than 100 pounds too. So what was even the point? Another character name repeat. Now this one just blew my mind. So, okay, we have a character named Mrs. Horace. Now, if you guys are keeping track, this is the third Mrs. Horace we have had in the series so far. One of them was in the Whispering Statue. We had Mrs. Horace. Well, it was Mrs. Horace so-and-so. So Horace was used as like the first name. And then in the Fire Dragon, we had Mrs. Horace so-and-so, again, a different so-and-so, but also using Horace as like the first name. But now this time we have Mrs. Horace, but Horace is the surname. But again, how many Mrs. Horaces are we going to have? I feel like this is something I should start tracking as well, because it's starting to become very reoccurring as far as a character name goes. I also thought it was funny that apparently Nancy and, you know, all of them can like speak German and French and everything, but Spanish, Nancy can't speak Spanish. She knows a little bit of words in Spanish, but she's not fluent, so I guess at least Nancy has her faults as well. So as far as the story, I really think it was interesting, and it definitely was a lot more, you know, like the travelogue type of story where not really so much of the mystery is what's really getting solved. Now, of course, bits and pieces are being uncovered as she goes, but it really just kind of felt like a tourist type of like ad. It was interesting to hear all of the places that they went to and everything like that, especially when it comes down to the actual reveal of the treasure and, you know, where it's at and how to get there and how the clues all tied in together. And I will say that if you look at the cover of the book and you are familiar with a certain image, you're going to immediately know exactly what this is. And while I was reading this, I did have a sneaking suspicion that that was how the story was going to end, which is what happened in the story. But if you're not familiar with it, I think it's a really interesting concept and a really fun rabbit hole to deep dive into if you're not familiar with it, because it is a very interesting type of occurrence, I will say. So overall, unfortunately, I did rank this one 2 stars just because for me, it took me a lot longer to read this one just because I was not as invested into the story, and I kind of felt like I had to like force myself to read it. So it actually took me about 2 weeks, you know, off and on to read this one. But I felt like if I had read it faster, it would have kept my attention better and it wouldn't have been as much of a drag for me. So in hindsight though, like knowing how the whole story went, I would probably rank it more like a 3, but my experience of reading it was more like a 2. But overall, I think it is a really interesting one. And if you are really interested in like South American culture, specifically Peruvian and Incan culture, this one's actually got a lot of really good information in it that I thought was really, really fun to read. Just some of the plot lines itself just kind of felt a little wandering, and I'm like, okay, how is this all gonna tie together? And the unlimited funds that these girls have blows my mind. All right, guys, and finally on to the last one of this set of books. This is number 45, which is called The Spider Sapphire Mystery, and this one was originally published in 1968. So this one reads, thrilling, dangerous adventures confront Nancy Drew while on a safari in East Africa with a group of American college students. Excitement runs high as the teenage detective delves into the theft of a fabulous sapphire formed by nature millions of years ago. The mystery starts in Nancy's hometown. Her lawyer father's client, Floyd Ramsey, who fashions beautiful and unusual synthetic gems, is accused of stealing the magnificent spider sapphire and exhibiting it as his own creation. Mr. Ramsey's enemies blackmail him, and by their vicious acts try to deter Nancy from going on the safari. How the daring young sleuth uncovers a nefarious scheme and also solves the strange disappearance of an injured jungle guide will keep the reader breathless with suspense from the first page to the last. Alright guys, once again, we have no orphans. Can you believe we didn't have a single orphan in this group of 5 books? I think that's kind of unheard of, so I feel like we are definitely due for another orphan story coming up soon. And then as far as bingo goes, you guys, I like made out with a bandit with this bingo card. I got 5 across bingos. That is crazy. If I would have had one more, I could have gotten a 4-corner bingo, and I would have also gotten another 5 across bingo with that. So I was so close to like almost having a blackout. I needed 1, 2, 3, 4. I needed 4 more spaces to have a blackout bingo. If I ever get a blackout bingo on one of my bingo cards, I will be absolutely stunned. Now this one I had absolutely no clue what the story was going to be about until I read the synopsis. Sometimes I like to know ahead of time like what the locations are gonna be or what the story matter is gonna be, but I kind of want to just like not spoil myself on that until I like get to that book, because I don't want to have that in the back of my mind while I'm reading other books and like wanting to be hurrying to another book to get to that one and just kind of like trying to get through all the books. So that's one thing I'm trying to not do in the future, is like look up all the books and then get excited for them. I kind of just want to get excited as they come. And if you are keeping track, yes, this is the 3rd international mystery in a row and the 4th international mystery in this group of 5 books. I feel like they just went crazy on the international books in this group of 5, and I so wish they would have spaced these out a bit more, because as interesting as the international stories are, they do get very exhausting to read because it's constantly going place to place to place, to landmark to landmark to place to landmark, and they're trying to really cram in so much in the story, and I always feel like the mysteries themselves do tend to take the back seat when it is an international or like a locale based type of story, but they just went crazy on the stories in this one. I wish they would have spaced them out a little bit more to kind of give you a little bit more breathing room. Nancy's passport must be just wild with stamps. We also have another case of where we have bad guys already going after Nancy and she does not have a clue what's going on yet. Literally page 1, bad guys, bam, they're coming in. Nancy doesn't know what to do. I always find those a little bit ridiculous, but hey, they are what they are. We also have a lot of racial insensitivities in this story as well, and it's very obvious in these. So again, fair warning, this one, again, it's not the worst one in my opinion so far of what I have read of all the revised text. For me, the most obviously blatant one was the haunted showboat. That one was just really tough to get through. This one just definitely is a product of its time and has a lot of slang and words we wouldn't use anymore. Some of the descriptions are just kind of ugh. So fair warning on that one. We do have a lot of emphasis on the skin tone of said suspects, which just right off the bat, a lot of assumptions being made, let's say. So there is one teeny tiny spoiler I will put right here, and it's gonna be super quick. So again, I will have what you need to skip to skip this spoiler. But very early in the book, Ned ends up getting kidnapped. All right, spoiler over. So because of that event, there is a clue that is given that gives us coordinates that actually gives us the closest idea we have ever had of where Emerson University is supposed to be located. And whenever I got to this part, I just kind of went down a rabbit hole and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm totally geeking out on this. So I will try to put this on screen to make this like as visually easy for you to understand as I'm describing. So we are giving a specific set of coordinates. We're not given like the full coordinates of like a specific degree or minute or second of the coordinates. So what I ended up doing to kind of try to narrow out the location of this specific place, I took the two extremes of each of the coordinates. So for example, the coordinate was 42 degrees. So I went all the way from 42 degrees to 42.999999 degrees. And so I did that with the latitude and with the longitude degrees. So that ends up giving us a rectangular shape of where this location could be as far as what the story says. And so I will put on screen what that looks like as far as the coordinates given. And if you are so astute, you might be noticing that, hey, a good portion of that is actually not land, it's water, so that can't be where this is supposed to be. So with that information, we can deduct that this is the general vicinity of where Emerson University is supposed to be located, which gives us like the closest idea we have ever truly had. Now, of course, we still don't know quite exactly how far River Heights is from Emerson, but based on the coordinates that were given, we do know that Emerson is somewhere in northern Ohio. We also get a little bit of a hint that gives us a little bit of an idea how far distance-wise River Heights is from Emerson. So at one point, the girls are going from River Heights to Emerson, and it says they left at 6 a.m. and they got there at noon. So that gives us about 6 hours of driving time, give or take, to get from River Heights to Emerson. So I just kind of geeked out on that little fact, and I thought it was really interesting because we haven't gotten anything more solid to this point until now, and I just thought that was really kind of fun. Once again, we have some more fat shaming from George, and she's really just like, she's on one, it seems like these last few books, because at this point they weren't even talking about food and the word pear comes up in conversation. And so George says to Bess, you love to eat, the answer should be easy for you. Fuck off, George, just fuck off, really, honestly. So as the girls are going to Africa, they fly to Kennedy Airport and then they are flying internationally. And I was so surprised that we didn't get a quick Aunt Eloise like catch up or a little cameo of her. She wasn't even mentioned, which I thought was very strange because in several of the last books, they actually go to New York and they have time to go hang out with Aunt Eloise before going to Peru. So I was very surprised that we didn't get a cameo from her in the story. And then we have another weird plot point that, again, it doesn't really go with a mystery at all, but we do have one of the characters who is going along with the Emerson group Safari, and she is just a terror. Her name is Gwen Taylor. She apparently is wearing a really gaudy blonde wig. She is just being a nightmare, totally rude person. But George is horrible to her as well. George says she looks like a freak. And Bess defends her by saying maybe she's just shy and underneath she's a nice person. And then George goes, no, she's too artificial. In my notes, I put, George is literally the living embodiment of gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. And you can't convince me otherwise. Once again, George has got to fat shame Bess. She says, if all you do is sit in a plane, sleep and eat, they're going to charge you for being overweight. George, like you're not also sitting in a plane, sleeping and eating and have nothing else to do when you're on like a 15-hour flight internationally. And George's words affects her so much that Bess ends up skipping on her dessert. Don't be George. If you are a George, don't be like that. That is just a horrible thing to be. So like I mentioned, there are quite a few racial and cultural insensitivities in this one. A few yikes moments, as I like to call them, as they are arriving to Nairobi in Kenya. There is a statement made and it says, there were white people, blacks, coloreds, which were the combination of black and some other race, Arabs, and Indians. Yikes. So as they get to Africa, they're doing a lot of sightseeing, going from place to place as one does. One interesting thing that I thought was really cool, one of the places they end up staying at was actually the same place Queen Elizabeth was in when her father passed and she ascended to the throne as the queen. I thought that was kind of interesting. I will say in the story, I really liked when it picked up when we actually get to Kenya because that's where really a lot more of the action is going on. But I do have to say, again, we also have an A plot, B plot structure like most Nancy Drew books, although a few of them lately seems like that hasn't been as prominent. However, in this mystery, with the A plot being the Sapphire stone and then the B plot being Nancy trying to track down the long lost brother of an African singer that was performing at Emerson before they left for the safari, I feel like the B plot is the absolute main plot of the story because there's absolutely no way she could have even figured out the A plot mystery had it not been for the B plot mystery. So I kind of feel like the name of the story is almost a little bit misleading because it's really not the main focus of the story. But how it all comes together is quite interesting, and again, you gotta suspend a little bit of disbelief, but it was a good story, I think, overall, even though there are still a few plot holes that I think maybe didn't hold up quite as well. And I think overall, to describe this story, no one said it better than a Goodreads reviewer by the name of Natalie Cannon, and she said, there was an attempt not to be racist, but it failed. And Natalie, I would absolutely agree with you. This story was not trying to be racist. It was not trying to be insensitive, but it did fall very, very far from that intention. So overall, I did rank this one 3 stars. Again, I think I probably would have ranked it a little bit higher had it not been for some of the racially insensitive. You always have to keep in mind that it is a product of its time, and while we can look back and understand and realize that languaging matters and that how things were discussed and talked about is not how we would talk about it today, I think you can still separate it and appreciate it for what it is, but not negate the fact that it has its problems. It really does. And there's a lot of Nancy Drew books are that way. That's why I get so heated about the whole fat shaming thing with Bess and George. I totally understand that, and I can see how we look at this and we think, how is that okay? And it's not okay. But we have to keep in mind that even the way we think today down the line, there are many things that we think are okay to say now and okay to do now that are not going to be okay in the future. And we don't have crystal balls, so we don't know what that's going to be. So if those were not the case, I probably would have ranked this 4 stars because I think this was a really fun, interesting story. And again, I'm not very familiar with Kenya at all, so the geographical environment was just really different, and I don't know, it was a really good story aside from all of the horrible racial comments and things like that that wasn't intending to be racial, but it sure as hell was. Alright guys, so that is it for this group of Nancy Drew books. I feel like I am flying through this series because after this I will have 11 books left of the original 56 Nancy Drew books. Now of course the whole series goes on further than that and I will be covering them all, but it will be fun to kind of hit that milestone of reaching book number 56. So that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram, link is below, and until my next video, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.